right. You are listening to the Aaron Davis podcast. And this time I'm lucky to have Eric Davis on. Special guest Eric Davis. He has come back from the amazing Combatives Summit in Florida. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some new court rulings that are in our favor. But before we get into that, Eric, can we have a quick background from you?
Sure,
I'm just
can.
kidding, bro.
First off, Aaron, I am honored to be on this show. I humbled that you invited me on, and yeah, man, I can go ahead and go into my bio. It's probably about 15 minutes or so. Is that cool?
Sure. Hey, bro.
Yeah.
Little cheers here.
Cheers.
Got a little bit of. We both have a little bit of fermented.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of
beverages,
a little bit of white wine in my pug mug here. Yeah, man. I've been abstaining, but I had a little bit at dinner tonight and had a couple of cold brews, and I got a little bit of white wine, and gonna chill with you tonight,
bro. This is just some low-cal near beer.
Oh,
I'm just kidding, dude.
They make low-cal near beer IPAs.
Hold on a second. It's stuck in here. Come on. Yeah, it's this new near beer by Coop called F5.
Well, I've had that. I don't recall it being near beer, though.
No, it is not. It's legit. All right. All joking aside, it's fun to get to hang out again tonight, bro. And I think we've got some fun stuff to talk about. I was not joking about the topics. So I think we're going to just jump right in here and have a great Tactical Twins jam session. You want to kick it off, brother?
Sure can. Like you mentioned, Aaron, I did just get back from the Combatives Summit in Auburndale, Florida. I told John Valentine, by the way, first off, John Valentine was the person that organized this event. Of course, he had folks helping him. It would not have went off near as well if it hadn't have had the support of Ben Albin and his wife Cindy, their awesome facility, Redbeard Combatives down there in Auburndale. Amazing facility, man. And just the awesome contributions of all kinds of partners, which we won't go into tonight, some of the sponsors, because tonight, I'm just kind of hitting on some summary. But what I told John Valentine, as we were, getting close to the end of the summit, is I told him, John, I knew this was going to be epic, but it was 10 times better. And literally that's the only way I can describe it, and epic is probably getting to be an old word these days, but that's okay. I'll use it as a descriptor. It was exponentially better than I thought, and I knew it was going to be an incredible experience. And, John brought together the world's preeminent experts in combatives, combining weapons with combatives, brought in some folks to do some, structure clearing classes, some of which I'll hit on here in just a minute, because again, just going to hit on some summaries. But, you got the lights of Matt Larson, the father of modern Army combatives. Of course, he, big part of the combatives community, huge contributor in that. And of course, Craig Douglas, Cecil Birch, Jerry Wetzel, Aaron Janetti, Dave Boone Benton, which, that's one of the classes I got a big impact from. Ben Albin, Cliff Byerly, Cole Miller, UFC fighter, just to name a few, and also, name Devin Crinklaw also took one of his classes. That's not everybody that taught. Those are just some of the classes that I took. But when we have John Valentine on next week, we're going to go in way heavier detail. But man, I tell you, Aaron, I learned so much. I had a wonderful time with like-minded people, folks that self-select into this type of training. Even though it was not heavily Sims based, it was a lot of physical work, a lot of wrestling, and putting some performance on the line. Cliff Byerly's class, or one of his classes, I should say, vehicle combatives. It had evos in it, just with the blue guns and whatnot, but it was still pretty physical. But overall, man, I learned a ton, and some of the classes that kind of stick out to me. I've been wanting to train with Jerry Wetzel for many, many years. I mean, he definitely is one of the individuals off of TPI, Total Protection Interactive. Back in the day, I learned a lot from those guys conversing, and I've been wanting to train with Jerry for many, many years. Which, again, I had this conversation with why we haven't had him on the show. I got no clue, other than I think any of our guests out there, or probable, or future guests, should understand that sometimes, man, we set commitments to certain people and things fall through, and then something else pops in, and we kind of do a little bit of Tetris, Aaron, don't we,
Oh
with
yeah.
guests? That's the only way I can describe it.
That's actually a good way to describe it.
Yeah, Tetris is a little bit of the way we have to do business sometimes with guests, because things change, and then of course our day jobs. So again, shout out to Jerry, buddy. It's not that we hadn't been wanting to have you on; it's just the way things have shook out. But we are going to square that away. Excellent knife control stuff, for based around dealing with it in an empty hands environment. And of course, it's wrestling based, which is a commonality amongst those in this particular path, because it freaking works, you know. And one of the ones that I really, really liked too, Aaron, was, you had you seen the movie or possibly read the book 13 Hours in Benghazi?
I did. I didn't read the book, but I certainly did see the movie.
So of course, the Obama administration, and more specifically Hillary Clinton, left a group of, of course, a CIA annex was close to Ambassador Stevens and his, I guess, a temporary. Um, I'm forgetting the name of. I wasn't really prepared to talk about that particular piece of it, but essentially a temporary location for an ambassador that wasn't really well protected, and the security there wasn't the best, and they got overrun. Lo and behold, on 9/11 in 2011, you'd think that the Obama administration would have planned for a little additional security. But anyway, nonetheless, there was a group of CIA contractors that went in and to save those people at that other annex location. And Dave Boone Benton was one of those individuals who survived. Freaking
Wow.
stud. And
Wow.
anyway, he was one of the instructors. And the thing is, Aaron, I am not at all an expert at clearing structures. You would probably agree that's just not something that you and I have much training in, and in my even in my job as a soldier, that wasn't something that was part of my wheelhouse. But man, just reductionist type thought process, excellent mental cues on the way that he described. Instead of pieing, he said, "I want you to arc," and it's a fluid searching mechanism, and just the way, 2 steps in the room, 2 steps off the wall, your point of domination, all that stuff. He just made it a lot easier. Now, of course, we're not a proponent of going in and searching through your home if you don't have to, or searching through a structure. But the premise behind this class was a active shooter situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went through the structure and cleared the rooms, and even a secondary drill was to actually go in and find a quote unquote loved one to extract them out of the building. But anyway, that was one that stuck out. Aaron Janetti's class, again, knife control concepts. Again, another person I've been wanting to train with for quite some time. His class was, built again around a wrestling base. But he focused in this class about using clothing, t-shirts or hoodies, as control. It was really good stuff, man. We were, Aaron, even at one point we were, and the way that he had us doing it, we were pulling shirts over our opponent's head and, using it kind of like a gi in many cases. And yeah,
Oh,
it was.
I saw a picture of someone with their t-shirt over their head. I thought, oh, that's different. So now I have some context. Cool.
Yeah, and Craig Douglas, that is, a ShivWorks, he had a class called Weaponizing Language. Now, you're well in tune with Muck, managing unknown contacts. So essentially, this weaponizing language was kind of like adding more nuance to Muck. Not just hitting play on the tape recorder, but really verbalizing your interaction with this unknown contact. We also spent time doing disarms, and you're familiar with the way that Craig does disarms, and anyway, man, just we did, of course, some default position stuff. Just really good addition to Muck. Oh, and he did a cool demo, by the way. So he started off. This was towards the end. And he's like, you always hear the adage, "Never draw on a drawn weapon."
Mm-hmm.
And man, he did this cool demo, Aaron, where and Scotty Oates was, the bad guy in this case, and he's got the gun pointed at Craig's head, and he's like, "What do you want? What do you want?" And he's like handing things out of his pocket. Here's this, and here's that. Oh, hold on a second here. Here's this. Yeah, whatever you want, buddy. And here, hold on a second. Click. Pull out a freaking small little pocket pistol. It was just a cool demo, just basically saying not everything's absolute,
Yeah.
And so, we're pretty much proponents of, not drawing on a drawn gun, but
Waiting our turn.
Yeah. But at the same time, Craig was proving the point, with proper tactics, and, if you feel you need to, then that was just one way of kind of proving that point wrong.
Bro, I'm going to interject here real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go down because this is literally it's kind of it's tangential, but it's still kind of part of what you're talking about. I was thinking about this the other day. The whole concept of the sidestep while you're drawing and fire,
Mm-hmm.
which would of course be on a drawn gun. Man, I would like to explore that if that's been kind of if it's fallen out of favor as a technique to teach, or the context of it, etc. I was thinking about that the other day. Maybe we can get someone on that's an expert on that, or do some research on that.
Yeah, that would be maybe in one of Tom's. I get what his. I'm embarrassed to say his. I guess we would call it his level 1 defensive pistol class,
Mm-hmm.
combative pistol, one, I think it is. Forgive me to our listeners that should have had that in front of me. But I know that at one point that was part of his curriculum,
Oh yeah,
and I
and
think it.
I've gone
Yeah,
through
go
it,
ahead.
so that's why. But I don't see him talk about it that much anymore.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
maybe he's got different thoughts on it these days, or but
maybe Lee, or I mean, heck, we can ask Tom ourselves. No big deal. But that would be a good question.
yeah. So we'll go back to your topic, man. You just made me think about
Oh,
that.
no, good point, buddy. Um, one of the other classes that was a lot of fun. We dig our buddy and coach, Cliff Byerly,
Heck yeah,
was his vehicle combatives class, and again, we love mental verbal cues. So this is something that the audience can gain some understanding of fairly quickly. And basically, when you're in a vehicle, it's it's a 360-degree
sphere
cube.
almost. Yeah,
What's that?
cube. That's it.
Yeah, it's a
That's it. Yeah.
cube
Sorry.
that you can use all the surface of that vehicle. And I mean, heck, you can even give up, and maybe preferable to give up your back. Say for instance, that's something we don't do in jujitsu. But one of the demos that Cliff demonstrated was giving up his back and asking one of the patrons to try to choke him. And of course, he was able to use so much pressure that person couldn't even do it, right? And so the rules are different inside of a vehicle. And I like the way Cliff explained it. He said, number one, whoever's head is highest typically wins and or is in a better position. So get your head above theirs. You know, keep your knees closer to your elbows. Um, and even that gets a little more nuanced, of course. But really, I'll digress back to that. Keep your head higher than the other person, and use everything around you like you're climbing rocks, like you're a rock climber. Handholds, footholds, being able to use the head of the seat to use as a foothold, the inside of a window sill that you can use as a handhold to, you know, give you more pressure. And essentially, man, you can triple the freaking pressure you can put on somebody using the seats and the headrest and the dashboard and all that stuff to make it freaking miserable for that other person. That was a fun class. I've done vehicle evos over the years, but it had been a while. And Cliff's explanation and coaching was really spot on.
That's awesome.
Well, Aaron, I'm not going to sit here and go over all the classes I took, because we're going to spend a lot of time with John Valentine. What I will say is, in closing, about the Combative Summit. Number one, this was a first time event. It not only sold out, it was overbooked. And man, John and his team of people put on a world class event. Man, John did a superb job of leading that effort, and so he deserves major accolades for that event, because it was an amazing time of learning and meeting people, and frankly, so cool and always humbled meeting so many listeners of the show that believe there's value in our show. And so that was real humbling and a lot of fun as well, man. You got
Well,
any questions?
bro, what was on my mind all weekend was that I was kind of pissed at you that you were getting to go and that I wasn't. In all seriousness, I was a smidge jealous. I'll admit, but I loved seeing what was going on from afar, and I texted a few of our good friends and a few of our friends that were some of the instructors that you mentioned, and every single one of them said it was incredible.
Yeah, and of
when you're
course, I
talking,
would be remiss if I did not mention two other people, and that is Cecil Birch, one of our excellent friends, and had a great time hanging out with him. Unfortunately, I didn't get to take his class because I was signed. You didn't get every single class that you asked for, but Cecil made me feel a little better about it. He said, you've trained with me but quite a bit before, and you hadn't trained with some of the other people, so it made me feel a little better about it. But also Chris LeBlanc, who is an excellent friend. For anybody that's a former or still TPI member, was KIT on TPI, SWAT officer, still on the job as a trainer for his department. He was there talking about his police shooting, that his officer involved shooting that he was in. And man, I had a great time hanging out and talking with him. We got some cool things coming up. Some a class that's coming together in Olympia, and he's gonna give me a hand. And boy, am I humbled to have his help for that, for certain. But more on that. But yeah, Aaron, I get it, man. There are times when you get to do stuff that I don't get to do, and you feel a little bit not jealousy, but like, man, I just wish I was there. That's probably what you're kind of getting at, huh?
well, bro, one of the things is that, and I won't get too sappy for our audience, but bro, the most fun you and I ever have is basically going to these training events and getting our butts handed to us, getting dehydrated sometimes because we're shooting so many rounds and, the Texas sun, but then getting through it and just having the elation of the learning and the experience. And man, you just can't, and you can't oversell the fact that the people, not only the instructors, but of course the students that you become friends with in this, frankly, kind of a small training community, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
you just start meeting a lot of them again, and you're so stoked to see them again. And I just want to say that that's part of the fun, man. Is simply the people, the camaraderie, the brotherhood, the sisterhood. It's pretty dang amazing. So yeah, I'm looking forward to next year. I pray that they are able to do it next year.
Yeah. I mean, I already see John's talking about he's already getting some commitments from instructors. And yeah, Aaron, there's no question I'm not missing that freaking event. The only thing that would stop me is a deployment,
Yeah.
and frankly, I'd be trying to make some drug deals to deploy at a different time if it interfered with
Or bro,
the
maybe get one of those lone rides on a helo. Just get back and forth real quick.
it's a long helo ride on some of the yeah,
Might
that's
crash
funny.
in the ocean.
Well,
All right,
well,
we're getting
Aaron, real
silly.
quick, man. So we weren't planning on doing like full-fledged accountability tonight, but for lack of a better term, I gave some of my accountability. Aaron, I think you had a little bit of input in some of your accountability this
Yeah,
week.
just a little bit, but I've mentioned it a little bit in the last few episodes, especially our gear and mindset ones. But man, again, I just have to give a shout out to Matt Reyna at Training Ground. Um, he, Learning in his school, the environment in his school, and the way he teaches, the way his students are, the way his main assistant is, Krista Hoke. It fires me up. It has fired me up to get back into jits, where I've had waning commitments. That's why it took me 5 years or so to get my blue belt. that's all right. I
Of
stuck with it,
course.
right?
Hmm.
But I'm fired back up, and I'm sitting here thinking about which classes I can go to, and keep learning. And they love having my wife over there, and it's just a blast. And I had a rough week last week, and I mean, there was no way I wanted to go to Jits last Thursday night, but I went, and as I'm in Joe Dirt, turn that frown upside down, stare at a clown. But in all seriousness, Jits cheered me up. And last night, I didn't have a bad day yesterday, but it just cheered me up again, man.
Awesome.
I'm just stoked to be fired up about it. It's when you have, I had a great school that I started out with, but this school for me, the way I learn and the people, it's just a huge difference, and it's great for learning.
Well, Aaron, that really makes me happy. I always love hearing about how much you've been enjoying jujitsu lately. It's something that I love dearly, more so recently in the last few years than I had for a little while myself. I went through that same kind of period where I still liked it a lot, and I still did it because I know or knew that it was vastly important. But I do have a genuine love for it right now. And interestingly enough, another kind of cool aspect of the Combatives Summit is that a lot of our audience members out there will know who Matt Pronka is. He's a former unit guy and a GM and USPSA. He of course runs with Ben Stoger. I've been talking about his CQB warm up carbine drill that I've been working on. Just a really really cool thing that he showed up at this event, and even took uh, some of the structure clearing classes that frankly a guy that's in his job doesn't really need that stuff. He's got you know more hours than anybody else that you can probably think of, or what I'm saying. I mean,
Yeah,
just tons and tons and tons of hours of doing that type of stuff. But he still went through the drills and respectful to the instructors that were teaching, and he got in there and did the same drills. But he and I were talking quite a bit, and shout out to Justin Ball, because he's kind of who helped the conversation start, because of course Justin Ball was in the unit as well, and I told I told him that Matt was going to be there because I saw him on the roster, and he texted me during the training. He's like, "Hey, Eric, tell Matt I said hello, and tell him he needs to come to Daybreakers." So I pulled Matt to the side and said that yeah, hey, Justin Ball said to come to Daybreak. Oh, Justin, yeah, I remember Justin. He's like, yeah, he said I need to get back into jiu-jitsu. He said, I actually would like to start competing in it. And Aaron, you hit it on the head earlier. Something about jujitsu, and this is kind of the conversation I had with him. Dealing with pressure, dealing with not wanting to go sometimes, dealing with yourself, your conditioning, all those things is just such a valuable aspect of jujitsu. And yeah, so I mean that kind of hit off, which I hope will be a a larger relationship with Matt. We'll see. More to come on that one.
cool.
But yeah, that was cool meeting and talking with him. And I will say this too. Craig Douglas, his Amos class is we haven't been able to take it, but we're well aware at some of the content. And it was really cool being around the conversation that Matt and Craig were having based around tactics and, the fact that, you know, you want to piss somebody off is talk about, a tactic that doesn't work, or their tactic doesn't work, or their way of clearing a structure isn't as good as my technique, quote unquote. And, it was real interesting to hear Matt talk about some sort of agnostic attitude towards those tactics. And he said, of course, we have our specific methods, but not always being dogmatic about it was interesting. And it was cool to Craig got some validation on some of his techniques in Amos that some other tier one folks out there, Craig said, could not give me a good reason why some of what I espouse, why they won't use what I use, or why they say some of what I use is wrong.
Ah.
And so it was real cool seeing that conversation. That I didn't mean to get off on that tangent, but it was just all around, man, just incredible people, an incredible time. And of course, the same type of elation that you feel after an ECQC or, any of those types of courses. It was definitely that feeling afterwards. So, yeah, man.
Sounds like you had a lot of cool inside baseball conversations too, and I'm
Yeah,
sure
absolutely.
everybody else there did too. You're just able to, relay your point of view and what you experienced there too. That's what's so amazing about that event.
Yep. Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
just one more quick thing. So, my range work. So the our audience may be getting tired of this, but that's all right. I I am still every single week doing a very simple lunch hour. My range is a
Cool.
mile from my office.
It's awesome.
I'll bring 200 rounds, and I will spend 100 rounds shooting strong hand only, and 100 rounds split between strong hand only and support hand only, and then I will use the other 100 mainly shooting the 4 to the body, 1 to the head portion of the 5x5. And I'm saying I'm not even using a timer, guys. The reason why is that my shooting digressed a bit, or a bit, during my issues with my neck, and I've just been in a mode of really filling out what I mean. Just really, I don't want to sound goofy about it, but just really getting the feel and the interaction with the pistol, knowing it better. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
The conversation between how the pistol is reacting to your technique and listening to that. That's the reason why I've been doing this very simple range session every time I've went, because I need to work on single hand shooting, and I need to get in tune with what my pistol is telling me as I'm practicing. And I'm telling you, I'm gaining major dividends from it. I'm not going to do it for a lot longer, but it has really helped me. And so, on top of that, though, I am back to adding some 25-yard groups. Last time I shot 25-yard groups, I think I talked about it too on the last episode, that I shot better than I did at that class with under Jeff Gonzalez. So that made me happy. My strength and everything's coming back, so I can shoot a little bit better at 25. Now, one last thing is that starting Friday, I'm going to burn through about 1,400 rounds this weekend,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm going to start with my Friday lunch hour session. I'm going to shoot an IDPA match on Saturday, And then on Sunday, one of our good friends, and we can talk about this afterwards because it's going to be fun. One of our good friends, one of our favorite guests, is going to fly in. I'm going to meet him, take him out to dinner Sunday night, and then I'm going to hit a class of his on Monday. Looks like I'm only going to be able to take half the class, but he told me to make sure I had at least around 800 rounds. so,
Awesome.
so, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot of 9mm flying out of a couple of my pistols this weekend, so it's going to be fun.
That's awesome. And Aaron, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, because you're talking about meeting Chris Lapre for the first time here coming up, because I've trained with Chris a decent amount over the years. But Aaron, another, of course, this summit was the first time I met John Valentine. Incredible meeting him in person and meeting our good friend, our a supporter of the show, but also a mentor as well, is Kato Murakami.
Oh yeah.
So shout out to Kato, man. I had a blast hanging out with him, and we even did a little bit of, he gave some nuance to some gun retention stuff, similar, of course, based on a lot of what Craig does, but he made a few points on grabbing, gun grabs from the rear that really, frankly, either Craig hadn't really pushed on that in our ECQCs, or I didn't remember it.
Yeah.
And so that was a cool discussion. But anyway, shout out to Cato out there, man. That was another cool aspect. Met a lot of people that we've been friends with for a long time. But
yeah,
anyway,
this, and I think putting a fine point on what you're saying is that we've made a lot of friends through this show, and we're slowly but surely meeting a lot of them, which is what you're saying about John. And then this weekend getting to hang with Chris. I look forward to reporting back how much Chris is going to help me with my shooting. So
yeah, and man, Aaron, you're just gonna, like I've always talked about, just Chris is just a kind, good-hearted person, man. So I'm looking forward to you being able to hang out with him for certain.
I think we're gonna have a dang good time.
And I will say one other thing. I think Cecil's actually a little pissed at us about the number 5 and the number 5. You know that Cecil wouldn't give me another picture. He wouldn't give me a picture when I was there.
He wouldn't. He wouldn't stand next to you and take a picture.
He said.
Did he say?
Let
me hear
Cecil
this.
Was uber kind to me as normal, but then when I think just at the time he's just giving me shit about it. It was pretty funny. He's like, I'm pissed about the, you guys letting Chris on a 5th, and then, excuse me. And then I posted some pictures, and Cecil said, "Hey, I got a good idea. Have all of them on before you have Chris back on."
Yeah, I saw that. He must have his little bottom hurt or something. He keeps bringing it up. None of us are bringing it.
He said he's gonna choke Chris out.
Awesome.
Cool.
All right, bro. Well, that's my mini accountability for this week. It's kind of accountability of what's going on,
Yep, exactly.
All right, bro. So I'm going to go ahead and crack open another near beer Coupe F5 IPA so I can chill out here and listen to you get scholarly. We may not be lawyers, but I mean, I think we're pretty good amateur constitutionalists, especially you. You're more of an amateur than I am. Oh, wait, that didn't come out right. Just joking, brother.
We always, I think it's funny. It is important sometimes to give disclaimers. We're not lawyers. We don't pretend to be. But Aaron, I'm going to bring up a very important point here in a second, in that the Constitution was intended to be for the layperson. by the way.
Yeah,
It's
right along. You're going right along with my segue there.
Yeah. So, with that said, Aaron, one of the big reasons we were going to talk about some of this is that we had a pretty awesome case come out of, or a decision come out of the Ninth Circuit under the Southern District of California from the Honorable Judge Roger Benitez, who, by the way, man, he kicks ass, man. And this was the case of Virginia Duncan et al. Against or versus Rob Bonta, of course, the Attorney General of California, one of those tyrants out there. But anyway, before I go into this decision, Aaron, I wanted to read a few things. And first, Aaron, I'd like to start with the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. I want to repeat that second clause again. Nor prohibited by it to the states. Okay? I mean, the 10th Amendment essentially, and I've heard Walter Williams talk about this before, Aaron, this is one of these things. I've been studying Article 3 of the Constitution this week a little more, and I'm going to say that I'm going to need to study it a little more to be able to espouse and be able to articulate better my understanding, that is. But bottom line is, the Article 3 is the judiciary powers of the federal government. But one thing is certain, Aaron, is that the 10th Amendment, by that very reading, is intended to state that anything in the Constitution, to include the Bill of Rights, is codified and in stone, right? Unless you amend the Constitution again. Okay? So, bottom line, the states, by the 10th Amendment, cannot go against the Second Amendment and create laws that infringe on the Second Amendment. And I have a few finer points. And again, I had heard Walter Williams talk about that many years ago. But it seems to be that maybe there's not the consensus that maybe you would think on it. But I think it's a subject I want to delve deep in further with some of our actual lawyer friends. Boy, wouldn't it be cool to have Mark Levin on here to talk about
Oh,
that?
jeez, dude.
Because I've heard Mark Levin talk about that before, but I really would like to hear his commentary on it.
Well,
But Aaron,
bro, we
go
could
ahead.
we could we could key him in on some firearms training, because he definitely, bare minimum, he's a gun owner and says he's prepped to use one if he has to.
Yep, he has said that before. Well, Aaron, here's a person that honestly has training in this area. So this is a little excerpt from Hillsdale College's Imprimis pamphlet. Pamphlets are badass, by the way. It
Mm-hmm.
was a way a lot of good information got out back in the day. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah.
So this little pamphlet that comes in the mail, a couple times a month or whatever it is. I don't recall, Aaron. But anyway, Aaron, this is a piece called Constitutional Myths and Realities by Stephen Markman. So he's a justice in the Michigan Supreme Court, but he also teaches constitutional law at Hillsdale College.
Legit.
Of course, Hillsdale College, an amazing conservative Christian based liberal arts, the real
That's what I was going
liberal
to
arts.
say, is a legit liberal arts university.
So, Aaron, he has some interesting commentary about the 10th Amendment. Let me read this here. Get my eyes straight. So, is the 10th, excuse me, let me digress a second. Myth or misconception. The national government and the state governments are regulated similarly by the Constitution. As the 10th Amendment makes clear, the starting point for any constitutional analysis is that the national, i.e., the federal government, can do nothing under the Constitution unless it is affirmatively authorized by some provision of the Constitution. The states, on the other hand, can do anything under the Constitution unless they are prohibited by some provision of the Constitution, like in the 10th Amendment, right? Get this where I can see this a little better here. Why then, one might ask, throughout the 19th century and well into the 20th century, before the Bill of Rights was thought to apply to the states, did Michigan and other states not generally infringe upon such indispensable freedoms as the freedom of speech or religion? How are individual rights protected? Well, in two ways, principally. First and most obviously, there was simply not majority sentiment on the part of the people of Michigan and other states to encroach upon such freedoms. Second, Michigan and all other states had their own constitutions protecting those freedoms. And I think that's important. So, trying to circle back on what I was trying to get at regarding the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment restricts states from passing laws that infringe on anything within the Constitution.
Yeah.
So any of these laws, including this high capacity, as they call it, quote unquote, or large capacity magazines in California, is absolutely unconstitutional, right?
Yeah.
Based on the 10th Amendment. But for some reason, we've had states believe that they can encroach on mainly the Second Amendment, because they try, and we know that we've had some major encroachments on the First Amendment, unfortunately, by private companies at the behest and, let's just say, in
Collusion.
proxy by the federal government.
Yeah, that's
right?
a better way to put it.
So again, this, it is somewhat novel in the last, 70 years that these types of major encroachments, and I may have some of those dates wrong, but anyway, Aaron, I just wanted to drive home the point that the 10th Amendment, by its very wording and its enumeration, restricts states from doing anything like California has been doing and other states have been doing against the Second Amendment. But we, like you and I have talked about, they'll pass a law and they know that it's going to be within the court systems for years, if not hit a court or maybe even a 5-4 decision in the Supreme Court that goes in their favor. That they're banking on that possibility. And Aaron, that's another point that you and I were talking the other evening, or maybe we were texting, I forget. Is I know that the appellate side of the court system is important. You can always have a judge or a panel of judges make a bad, unconstitutional decision, and you need some remedy, right? The problem is, man, it gets frustrating seeing these cases bounce around, and it's like you don't seem to have a real closure in many cases, unless it finally makes it to the Supreme Court. But Aaron, the Supreme Court was not really intended to be the arbiter of everything law. Is it there to be an arbiter? Of course it is. But, interestingly enough, I, was listening to a lecture by Dr. Arnn of Hillsdale.
Yeah.
Because I decided, I'm like, you know what? I need to learn this better. So I'm digging into the Supreme Court course,
Oh yeah.
the online course that is for Hillsdale, just so I can understand a little better. So, Aaron, here I'm just going to read a little piece of the of Article 3 of the Constitution, and this is Article 3, Section 2. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under the Constitution. Right. So that statement alone basically says that all cases of law and equity um, are under the umbrella of the judiciary. But the Constitution then goes, and I won't go all the way through this, talks about all the types of cases. Um, those of affecting ambassadors, other public ministries and councils, so on and so forth. It extends into controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between state and citizens of other states, between citizens of different states, so on and so forth. So it's
So it's
going into,
interstate.
yeah, yes, yeah. So in all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministries and consuls, and those in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. So we are talking about those higher level type cases. But in all other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction both as to the law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as Congress shall make. Now, that I think, you can read into that,
Mm-hmm.
that obviously the Supreme Court ultimately can be the appellate to these types of cases. All that said, the founding fathers overall, when I go back to these controversies, these civil controversies were the main intent of the Supreme Court. But ultimately, the vision was that a bulk of these controversies would be settled at district courts, the lower courts. But instead, the Supreme Court is now the arbiter of all of those primary cases that eventually all through all the appeals and whatnot. But
So
go ahead.
to me, what my observation is that these things that occur within these states, the states have all the money they want to continually appeal things. So when they don't get their when their legislation is not held up at the lower court levels, they're going to push it through the circuit appellate courts and then all the way up to the Supreme Court because they've got endless resources and endless time, right? So again, we're going to write whatever law we want and see you in court.
Well, Aaron, the controversy is judicial review, meaning that all cases end up making it towards to the Supreme Court for the final arbitration. Now, Thomas Jefferson didn't like that. Being the author of the Declaration of Independence, one of our founding fathers, and multiple founding fathers did not envision the Supreme Court as being this all powerful branch of the government. As a matter of fact, they saw the judiciary as being a lesser power.
Interesting.
But
Not a co-equal
yeah,
as we've all learned in civics
yes,
classes.
yes, and if of course that co-equal, there's some legitimacy to that. But I mean, you can look at all kinds of commentary back then, and they did in fact see it more as a lesser power, in that it
Interesting.
wouldn't have this overarching, overarching power
Bro,
over.
I would assume, I'm just, again, putting on my amateur constitutionalist hat here. I would assume that's because they valued the statesman and that they foresaw and that the legislature where the people were represented, where they were represented, that would be where all the action happened.
Oh, absolutely. That was really the vision. Was that the
Because that
Yep, go ahead.
would allow the most representative form of government at the federal level.
Absolutely. Very correct, man. And like I was saying, Thomas Jefferson did not like the Supreme Court being a final arbiter. But today the Supreme Court believes that they are,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so do the majority of the citizenry. Abraham Lincoln believed, and these are paraphrases that I wrote notes on, Aaron. Lincoln believed that if the final rule was always the Supreme Court, the people have ceased to be their own rulers, resigning their government to a eminent tribunal. And Dr. Arnn said that it doesn't mean that a single decision by the Supreme Court is good and all and forever. Excuse me, again, this final arbiter, I keep repeating myself, is more of it's a more novel thought process,
Yeah.
in the 21st and 20th century. But anyway, all of that said, Aaron, to get onto some commentary on this case, because man, this decision was actually pretty damn good, man. I'm sitting here looking at the time, so it shouldn't take me too long. So I think it's important, Aaron, to read a decent amount of this, and we can kind of talk
And
about
Eric,
it.
but before you do that, going back to what we jokingly talked about being amateur constitutionalists, and then you rightly answered to that the Constitution was supposed to be easily understood by the layperson. And when I was reading this decision, he's using quite a bit of very common language and almost, I mean, just very frank, unlawyerly language, if I can use that term. So yeah, but before we get into that, I just wanted to make that comment before we dig in.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Let me take this down a little bit because I just need a little more light. I feel silly here. Okay, so that you just said that, Aaron. So, myth or misconception. Again, this is from Judge Stephen Markman in this Hillsdale piece. The Constitution is a document for lawyers and judges, and he basically says the Constitution was written for those in whose name it was cast, we the people. It is a relatively short document, and it is generally straightforward and clear cut. With only a few exceptions, there is an absence of legalese and technical terms. So we're supposed to be able to easily understand it. And frankly, that's what Dr. Arnn talks about. Overall, it is fairly easy to understand. He said you just have to pay attention, you know? And of course, we always have to think with 18th century vernacular in many cases, but it's not that difficult. So again, in this case, this is Virginia Duncan versus Rob Bonta, and again, this decision is from Judge Benitez. And Aaron, I'm going to try to summarize this as best I can. But Aaron, there's some important readings here
Oh yeah,
that I think
it's a good decision.
All right. So basically, Aaron, I'll summarize some of this paragraph. Basically, this case was, Benitez threw out this magazine ban as being unconstitutional some time ago. I don't remember the exact time frame.
Yeah.
I could read it out of here, but I'm not going to do that. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sent it back down effectively to the Ninth Circuit and said, hey, You need to retry this and decide based on in the light of Bruin, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, introduction. There is a long tradition of widespread lawful gun ownership by private individuals in this country. According to the United States Supreme Court, Americans have an individual right to keep and bear arms. The Second Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees the individual right to possess and carry weapons in case of confrontation. This guarantee is fully binding on the states, 10th Amendment, right? And limits their ability to devise solutions to social problems. That's what the left's always trying to do, right? Devise solutions to social problems. Back to the decision. And the guarantee protection, and to guarantee protects the possession of weapons that are in common use or arms that are typically possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes. These are the decisions this court is bound to apply. It's our duty as judges to interpret the Constitution based on the text and original understanding of the relevant provision, not on public policy consideration or worse, fear of public, I'm going to mess this up, opprobrium or criticism from the political branches. This case is about California state law that makes it a crime to keep and bear common firearm magazines typically possessed for lawful purposes. Based on the text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment, this law is clearly unconstitutional. The detachable firearm magazines solved the problem with historic firearms running out of ammunition and having to slowly reload a gun. When more ammunition is needed in a case of confrontation, a larger magazine is required. Many gun owners want to have ready more than 10 rounds in their guns. As a result, in the realm of firearms, magazines that hold more than 10 rounds are possibly the most commonly owned thing in America. These large magazines number over 100 million. For handguns, the most popular sizes range up to 17 rounds. The most popular sizes for rifles is 30 rounds, is what it should say. Yet, regardless of the overwhelming popularity of larger magazines, California continues to prohibit any magazine capable of holding more than 10 rounds. There is no American tradition of limiting ammunition capacity, and the 10-round limit has no historical pedigree, and it is arbitrary and capricious. It is extreme, period. Our federal government and most states impose no limits, and in the states where limits are imposed, there is no consensus. Delaware landed on a 17-round capacity limit. Interesting. I didn't know that. Illinois and Vermont picked limits of 15 rounds for handguns and 10 for rifles. Colorado went with a 15-round limit for handguns and rifles, and a 28-inch tube limit for shotguns. New York tried its luck with 7-round limit. My gosh, I remember that. That did not work out. New Jersey started with a 15-round limit, then reduced the limit to 10 rounds. The fact that there are so many different numerical limits demonstrates the arbitrary nature of the magazine capacity. And so I'm going to, skip the next piece here because that's not near as necessary. Numbers vary, but some estimate that 81 million Americans own between 415 and 456 million firearms. Further, millions of Americans across the country own large capacity magazines. One estimate shows that civilians possess about 115 million large capacity magazines, or LCMs, out of a total of 230 million magazines in circulation. Put another way, half of all magazines in America hold more than 10 rounds. A more recent large-scale survey estimates that Americans today own 542 million rifle and handgun magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. Home defense, which common use, right?
Mm-hmm.
Home defense and target shooting are the two most common reasons for owning these larger magazines. Moreover, the survey reports 48% of gun owners have owned a handgun or rifle magazine that holds more than 10 rounds. But California bans these typically possessed magazines kept and used for self-defense. Why are larger magazines chosen for self-defense? Crime happens a lot. One recent estimate holds that guns are needed defensively approximately 1,670,000 times a year. Another report, originally commissioned alongside by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, estimate between 500,000 and 3 million, which we've cited here before. Now, he then goes in, and I'm not going to read all these because it just too verbose. We're going to have this decision in the show notes. All kinds of sightings of actual self-defense cases where people needed more than freaking 10 rounds, much more in many cases. So we'll let folks read that.
Yeah, bro. I found that great. That I don't know. I've not seen any Second Amendment case decisions where they inserted those types of stories and examples. That was great.
Yeah, excellent. And so it kind of comes to the point where, you know, basically he's drawn the conclusion that all these are in common use.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it's not in the history, text, and tradition, right? Which we're going to kind of talk about here in a second, and we can kind of hit a little further on it. Excuse me. So the best analog laws requiring citizens to keep and carry sufficient bullets and gunpowder to serve in the militia. So this is closer to the end of the decision here. California ignores founding era laws that present the best analog to its present day magazine law. There are the manifold early militia laws requiring each citizen not to the limit of ammunition he could keep, but to arm himself with enough ammunition, at least 20 rounds. Government remains fixed on the notion that it alone can decide that anything larger than a 10-round magazine is not suitable for a citizen to have. But there are no analog cases in our history. There are no cases where American government dictated that lever action rifles were unsuitable because single shot rifles were good enough, or that revolvers were unsuitable because derringers were good enough. I love these examples, man.
Yeah.
You know, again, using logic against their illogical arguments. These choices have always belonged to the people to decide for themselves how much firepower they will need. The right to have firearms for Social Security was important at the time of the Constitution was adopted. There were many enemies of the young nation, and armed citizenry provided a much needed deterrent effect. Early citizens remembered how the Minutemen of Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, by assembling as a militia, fought back against a hostile British march to take away guns and gunpowder in April 1776. Man, in a decision, you're hearing these awesome, reminders of history.
Yeah.
During the nation's founding era, federal and state governments enacted laws for the formation and maintenance of citizen militias. 3 such statutes are described in Miller. Rather than restricting too much firing capacity, the laws mandated a minimum firing capacity. These statutes required citizens to arm themselves with arms and a minimum quantity of bullets and gunpowder, not to disarm themselves. when Congress passed the Militia Act in 1792, the law required a citizen to be equipped to fire at least 20 to 24 shots. Yeah, it's pretty neat. A 1786 New York law required no less than 24 cartridges. So, you got a 24 round magazine, of course we knew it weren't, but again, they're saying at
It
least
would be
have,
the equivalent. It would be there's some argument about that, but in other words, though, it was the limiting capacity. Excuse me, the limiting capacity at that point was how many cartridges you could have.
yep, exactly. So in 1786, New York law, excuse me, I already read that, pardon me. And in 1785, Virginia law required a cartridge box of 4 pounds of lead, including 20 blind cartridges. In 1776, Paul Revere's Minutemen were required to have 30 bullets of gunpowder. Oh, 30 rounds. 30
Uh-oh.
round,
That sounds like
30 round clip.
that sounds like a black gun.
A 30 round clip. Sorry. Freaking nutballs. Anyway, these and other citizen militia laws demonstrate that, contrary to the idea of firing capacity upper limit on the number of rounds permitted, there was a legal obligation for the average citizen to have at least 20 rounds available for immediate use. There were no upper limits. There were floors on the floors, there were floors, and the floors were well above 10 rounds. California's large capacity magazine ban is a diametrically opposed analog. As one court explained under Bruin, the Second Amendment does not forbid all laws other than those that actually existed at or around the time the Second Amendment's adoption, but rather the Second Amendment must at most forbid laws that could not have existed under the understanding of the right to bear arms that prevailed at the time. California's large capacity magazine ban did not exist and could not have existed under the understanding of the Second Amendment at the time of the founding. This is clear because militia laws of the federal and state governments required citizens to keep and carry more ammunition supplies than 10 rounds. A prohibition like 32.310 would have been impossible to enforce and runs contrary to legal commands for militia readiness. Conclusion. Removable firearms magazines of all sizes are necessary components of semi-automatic firearms. Therefore, magazines come within the text of the constitutional. The constitutional declaration that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, because millions of removable firearms magazines able to hold between 10 and 30 rounds are commonly owned by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes, including self-defense. And because they are reasonably related to service in the militia, the magazines are presumptively within the protection of the Second Amendment. There is no American history or tradition or regulating firearms based on the number of rounds they can shoot, or of regulating the amount of ammunition that can be kept or carried. The best analog that can be drawn from historical gun laws are that early militia equipment regulations that required all able-bodied citizens to equip themselves with a gun and a minimum amount of ammunition in excess of 10 rounds. Because the state did not succeed in justifying its sweeping ban and disposition mandate with a relevantly similar historical analog, California Penal Code 32310, as amended by Proposition 63, is hereby declared to be unconstitutional in its entirety and shall be enjoined. So I'm just going to go ahead and end there because I think,
Excellent.
I had some other points to make behind some of the vernacular at the time that I just kind of breezed over just for brevity's sake because of the time. But, essentially to summarize it is that, both Heller and Bruin established the right of the citizenry to have firearms for self-defense, for lawful purposes. And of course, Bruin ruled that unless you could prove that there was a historical analog, it is unconstitutional. And man, the findings in this decision, man, were just spot on.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on it, buddy?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's been, at least that I've read, a decision that enunciated so clearly how Bruin affected firearms ruling or cases where a ruling would be over Second Amendment protection.
Yep.
I mean, it's just full of the references to the history and tradition test, right?
Yep.
And just the again along those lines, historical analogs, and he put it back on them, saying that now wait a minute, in the past, not only was there not a limit, there was a requirement, there was a floor.
Yep.
That you had to have at least this much ammunition. Now, maybe an argument still illogical that could be made would be, well, they didn't have semi-automatic firearms. And again, what's hilarious is when they say they didn't foresee these types of weapons, like that awesome BCM you have behind you, bro.
Mm-hmm.
That they didn't foresee that. Bro, I believe that it wasn't, and it was Thomas Edison that invented bifocals.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, or at least either way, the founding fathers were well aware of constant evolution of technology.
Yep.
I guarantee you, if they would have thought there would be, they had the foresight. If they thought that there would be this increase in more dangerous weapons, that they would have they would have detailed that. So the fact that they didn't, and the very fact, again, I'm trying to put a fine point on this, is that they knew there would be increases in technology, yet they didn't mention that. They didn't try and put a limit on the future technology. So, yeah, I love that, how, again, that the decision enumerated and enunciated so well, bringing into their decision Bruin. And frankly, though, right, that's exactly what the Supreme Court told them to do.
Exactly.
I believe what they did was they remanded it back to the Ninth Circuit, and then the Ninth Circuit remanded it back down to Benitez,
Yes,
correct?
that is correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. I did not enunciate that very well.
That's all right.
Yep. So Aaron, and I do have one other, this is a section that I intended to read. But it's kind of coming back to really what this boils down to. The Second Amendment provides, quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment extends prima facie to all instruments that constitute bearable arms, even those that were not in existence at the time of the founding. According to Heller, the Second Amendment is naturally divided into two parts. its prefatory clause and its operative clause. The former does not limit the latter grammatically, but rather announces a purpose. The amendment could be rephrased: because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The first salient features is that it codifies a right of the people. Heller then examines the substance of the constitutional right, the verbs to keep and bear, and their object, arms. So what does it mean to keep and bear arms? The Supreme Court concludes the 18th century meaning of arms is no different from the meaning today. 1773 edition of Samuel Johnson's dictionary defines arms as weapons of offense and armor of defense. Mm-hmm. So going a little further, I won't go into all this, Aaron, but bottom line, he's making the point in here that without a magazine, the pistol or the firearm itself is not functional. So, the magazine is integral to the functioning of the firearm. Mm. Without the magazine, it's not a firearm, and essentially makes the point that magazines are part of arms. And that was one of the points that, and I don't have it pulled up right now, is that some of the definitions of the older vernacular basically said that all arms are all things that you use for protection, for offense and or defense. So not just defining it as a firearm, but all arms, and that magazines are included in that.
Yep. Just like exactly. Sometimes we forget about it, that there are Second Amendment challenges in states and cities that limit knives. So that's a good point. This is part of the Second Amendment, man. So what model is that?
It's the same exact one you got. I don't think I ever told you. I wanted a smaller one sometimes.
Bro, did you get a Dragonfly?
I sure did.
This is my favorite knife I've ever had.
Now, I will tell you, Aaron, a good percentage of time I prefer a slightly larger one, but this is almost like the perfect pocket knife. Yeah. And it can still do some work defensively, and it's easy to keep sharp. But you know what I like sometimes, man? I like to be minimalist.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
That's cool.
You like the blue? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't. You're kind of a little bit of movie magic here. You're kind of gridding out a little bit on my end, but when this video comes through, it'll look good. Yeah, that's sweet, man. And we're twins all the time. Yeah. Never stopping.
Well, Aaron, we're sometimes good about ending right at it, about an hour and 30 minutes, man.
It's kind of our tempo, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Yeah, well, Aaron, hopefully that wasn't too verbose. I skipped around a little bit, but I think
it was great. And by design, we put some of this heavier stuff at the end of the show, just in case some people want to bow out. Just to be frank, we're honest guys. That's why we do it that way. Hopefully, those of you that are still hanging around with us, you're enjoying it. And I just want to say real quick, Eric, a big shout out and thank you to the people that listen to our show. This show was something that you and I never envisioned having, and it came about. You asked me to join you in this endeavor, and I never pictured it being what it's become, and we're forever grateful for the listeners and definitely the guests that support us by coming on the show. And I appreciate being able to do this with you, brother. So
absolutely. Like I said to you, because I remember very well when I came to you and asked you, And Aaron, I would say that the best word I can use is that you acted stupefied.
Yeah.
Like, what would I, why me? Why would you ask me to be involved in this? And I think I remember saying, man, I can't think anybody else I'd want to have doing this
Rock
with
on.
me.
Rock on,
So
man. It's been fun. And I see it being fun for a long, long, long time. Well, bro,
absolutely
I'm going to go watch Better Call Saul with my son. Man,
cool.
he's got me hooked on that freaking show. So I was texting him just a bit ago saying, "Hey man, wait on me to start that show. There's a good episode I want to see."
Cool.
So, bro, love you. Good
Love you
scholarly
too, man.
work there as an amateur constitutionalist. I'm
Thank
pretty
you, man.
impressed. So,
Thanks,
good
buddy.
stuff. And hey, man, you have a good night, and I'll talk to you next week, man. Love you.
Later, buddy. Love you, man.